Welcome to another edition of Sunday Morning Adult Sunday School. I'm John McMath, and we've been studying in background to the books of Joshua and Judges. I don't know how far we'll get, but we'll keep at it, and maybe it'll be fun while it lasts. We'll see how we do here. This morning we'll actually get into Joshua itself. I'm not going to attempt a verse by verse through this material. As some of you know, I did my doctoral dissertation on Joshua Judges. I wrote over 500 pages. And so far I'm on page 3. Okay, so we're not going to get through it. And you probably wouldn't want me to. Yeah, let's see what I've got here. So you might want to have a Bible ready. Let's pray and we'll launch in. Father, thank you for the day. We thank you for this beautiful weather, this promise of summer. We pray, Father, that this morning you'd open our hearts to your word. Help us to see the significance of this ancient story for our own lives. We pray that you would bless our fellowship now. In Christ's name, amen. Amen. Okay, Joshua starts right out with the death of Moses. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua. So now we're going to have this call of Joshua, and it happens at the death of Moses. This is a major break in the historical story, in the line. The scholars who work on this stuff call Joshua the beginning of what they call primary history. Primary history seems to have been written mostly by the prophets, and this follows up on Moses. And so you've got the core of the Old Testament, which is the Pentateuch, 5 books of Moses. Now, this is the story of creation, of sin, of judgment, of the redemption of the people of Israel, the creation of Israel, the redemption of Israel, and the setting up of Israel to be a kingdom of priests. Okay, so all of this is going on in Genesis through Deuteronomy. And during the Egyptian period, the people of Israel for 430 years were incubated in Egypt. This was a good place to develop numbers and to become a people. And at the time, it was a really pretty good place. With the rise of Ahmose II, and later, more importantly, Thutmose III, it became an unpleasant place to be. And the slavery of Israel lasted there in Egypt for probably 70 years, perhaps longer than that. Scholars disagree, but there's a good long troubling period in Israel's history, and the redemption from that is promised all the way through. Moses tells them that God will bring them out of Egypt in order to bring them in to the promised land. So the purpose of the whole exercise, this whole Exodus thing, and all of the miracles, was to prepare a people now to come into the promised land. We've looked at the background of the Canaanites and all of the otherites who lived in the land at that time. A very disjointed group, deliberately so. There never was a united nation, a nation state in the area of land that we call Israel. There never was a, quote, Palestine, unquote, until ever. I mean, there never has been. The Romans called it that as a way of associating the place with the Philistines, who were the enemies of Israel. And then in modern times, Yasser Arafat invented the name Palestinian to speak of the Arabs who had moved into Israel with the Aliyah, with the return of Jewish people to the land so that they could get jobs. They were essentially economic migrants into the area. There had never been a prosperous state there after the fall of Israel. But anyway, that's a whole lot of other stuff. Joshua begins the story of Israel in the land, and this is going to go through Joshua, Judges, Ruth, of course, fits in there, and then the Samuels, the Kings, Ezra, Nehemiah. That's primary history, and that will take us through the whole history of Israel from the return to the land down through the removal of the people from the land and the exile to Babylon, 70 years of exile. And then they're back around 530 BC for the very brief intertestamental period, building of the Second Temple and some of that. So the whole history of Israel really can be summed up in this thing. They were created, they went to Egypt, they were brought out to be brought into the Promised Land, and there in the Promised Land, they were expected to be a kingdom of priests, a people of God, a blessing to the nations because of their relationship with God. And that failed, essentially. It really didn't work. It doesn't seem to be possible for a nation to live as the people of God without some kind of human governmental control. And so the judges were tried. That really doesn't work. The kings made an effort. That didn't really work. It just got worse and worse and worse and worse, and then Israel was put under the control of the nations. And that has been the story, and it's not a pretty story. Israel's return to the land begins another chapter in Israel's history that some scholars believe has to be the last chapter. That's not necessarily true. I think it probably is, but it's hard to tell how long that last chapter will go. The prophets say that just before the coming of the Messiah at the end of the age, Israel will be brought back to the land. Having returned to the land, they will suffer under wars and all kinds of problems until finally they live at peace and prosperity in a stable Middle Eastern environment. At which time all hell will break loose. Now, so far we haven't seen a whole lot of peace and prosperity. Plenty of prosperity, but no peace. Every time I've been to Israel, they've been at war. I've never visited there when there weren't some kind of the accoutrements of war. So that means that we're still in that stage, and there's a final episode coming. Okay, so Joshua, the servant of Moses, who was the servant of the Lord, now hears from God, who gives him a call to lead the people. Moses, I like to tell people, went up on Mount Nebo, And he looked out across the Jordan Valley, and he looked down at the river, and he considered the difficulties of getting all those people through Israeli customs. And so he went up on the mountain and died. Sometimes that's how I feel, doing the same thing. Israeli customs is tough, but almost as difficult as getting back out when you're done. But I love it. Okay, so Joshua was given this command, and it's a fairly simple thing, but it's important. Before I get into the text of this whole command thing, this shot was taken in Jordan on the way to the Allenby Bridge crossing. This was shot from the right front seat of a taxi cab, driven by an Arab taxi driver, who insisted on pulling out his photo album from his glove compartment and showing me all of his relatives who lived in Philadelphia and Chicago and Los Angeles and places, all while driving with one hand when I had the courage to look at the speedometer briefly, 140 kilometers per hour down that road. Yeah. People sometimes wonder why I still have nightmares about traveling with groups in Israel, but there it is. This is roughly the view that Moses and Joshua and the rest of them in the plains of Moab, while Deuteronomy was being preached, this is roughly the view that they would have had. I'm about 3 miles from the Jordan Valley here. They're in the background, all washed out, which is not the way it's supposed to be, but it's all washed out because the scanner does that, are the cliffs of the Judean wilderness over on the far side. Jericho is...
You have a stick right behind the screen if you want to use it.
Do I?
Right
And I'm trying to remember where Jericho is in this. It's right over there. Jericho is not much. Jericho is a pimple in the Jordan Valley. It's not, there's not enough of a town there to say, oh, look, we're in Jericho. If you notice that you're in Jericho, you've already gone through it. It's a little bitty place. The ancient city is still there. The mound is there. It has been excavated multiple times because this is Jericho, after all. It's an important place for biblical studies. The story of the fall of Jericho, great story. Okay, lots of good stuff. When it comes to archaeology, and here again, I'm not going to bore you with a million details, but I could. I want you to understand that the evidence for the conquest and settlement in the biblical story, the Joshua Judges sequence, is overwhelming. I mean, quite literally overwhelming. In my dissertation, over 100 pages is bibliography. I spent an enormous amount of time finding and reading virtually everything that had been written about the conquest and settlement narrative. All of the digs. I actually participated in a dig in 1982 at Lachish in the Judean Shephelah, and fascinating stuff. That's an interesting city in the conquest. It's just barely mentioned. Lachish is a minor city in the Bible, but it was major in Judah at the time. The archaeology there is really, really important for all kinds of other stuff, including understanding the date of the conquest. The archaeologists, beginning back about 100 years ago, began noticing that around 1200 to 1300 BC, there were hundreds of sites that were burned, destroyed, dismantled, abandoned, whatever. So it's obviously a time of great chaos. William Albright, one of the most important figures in the development of biblical archaeology, considered a moderate by the leftist crazies, established that, well, the Bible seems to indicate that there was a whole lot of fighting going on and Joshua knocked over a bunch of cities. And the archaeology seems to indicate that a whole bunch of cities got burnt, knocked down, whatever, during the 1200s BC. Therefore, the Exodus and conquest must have happened in the 1200s. That's the fundamental base of the late date for the conquest. Now, the problem with that is that that late date fits neither the archaeology nor the biblical text. If the biblical text can be considered even remotely historical, then the late date doesn't make sense, among other things. I'll show you some places, but there are only 3 cities in Israel that were burned during the conquest. As Joshua went through, he only burned 3 places: Joshua, or Jericho, Ai, and Hatzor. Okay? Jericho and Ai are quite close together, and Hatzor is in the north, in the Galilee. And those were the 3 that were burned. And the connection that they had with one another is that all 3 of them were associated with a particularly virulent sort of nature worship religion that we call moon worship. When you see the crescent moon being adored by the crowds, that's something to stay away from. If you want, anybody that's got a crescent moon on their national flag has probably got some other problems. Moon worship was associated with some of the most remarkable nature worship stuff. And I'm not going to tell you any details, but it's really, really bad. And it's significant that Jericho, Ai, and Hatzor all have real good evidence for this moon worship going on. The name Jericho means city of the moon. Jericho, Yereach is the moon. Ai is a difficult place. We haven't, scholars don't agree on the location of Ai, but of course if we did, that would make some of us unnecessary. I've always rejected the Et Tel site that everybody believes is Ai, because it doesn't have any layers, no layers at all that correspond with the biblical account of Ai. It doesn't have any. It's in the wrong place. It's in the wrong era. None of the layers that should be there are there, and all kinds of layers that shouldn't be there are. You know, if there was any place else, anything like this place, anywhere near this place, then that would have to be the place, but we're having trouble identifying it. We think it's very likely that Bethel is in the modern city of Ramallah, north of Jerusalem. And in fact, is precisely in the center of Yasser Arafat's government compound in Ramallah. So our chances of excavating at Bethel are slim. Anyway, here we go. So we're on our way. There's lots of stuff going on there. And God says, Moses, my servant, is dead. This is verse 2. Now therefore, rise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land I am going to give them, to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, to the great sea toward the going down of the sun, shall be your territory. Now that's an unusual description of the land, and I'm not going to go into the details of it. Some of the descriptions are different, but essentially it runs from the desert to the Mediterranean, and from the mountains of Lebanon south to, again, the southern desert, the Negev, all of that. This would include some chunks of Jordan and Syria, parts of Lebanon, but we don't need to quibble. The land that Israel today occupies is, in fact, the Promised Land. There's hard to argue that that's not true. The leftist scholars who argue against Israel being in that land as any kind of a legal thing say that Israel just invented these stories in order to back up their claim to the land. Any honest investigation will show you that that's not true. So God says, you're going to get up with these people, you're going to cross that Jordan, you're going to give them this land, and every place where you put the sole of your foot, I have already given it to you. Okay, so there's two things going on in this, and I like to tell people, let's see if I've got a heading for this. Yeah, Joshua's call, first nine verses here, is specifically commanded in this call to a ministry. He's specifically commanded to pick up the people and commence military operations to take the land of Canaan, the land of the Hittites, away from the indigenous people and make a place for Israel to begin their life in the land. That's the call. And that call is a command with a promise. I like to say that every biblical call, whether it's a call to ministry or a call to a specific vocation or even the call to salvation, is always going to be a command with a promise. Those of you who are business people know that if you've got some enterprise and you've got people working for you, and you decide that something new needs to be done, you pick somebody that you can trust. You know, a shop foreman, whatever. Say, Mr. So-and-so, we need you to design and remodel that corner of the factory over there for the fabrication of widgets. You're going to have the budget that you need for the remodeling, all the equipment that you decide you have to have in order to do this job, and as many as 4 journeyman welders and 1 master welder. Okay? So you write that up and present me a budget, and I'll make sure you get it. Okay, there's 2 things going on. The boss has said, here's what I want you to do. You are hereby ordered to do this, so go do this. And then he says, by the way, you're going to need resources in order to make this happen. You're not just going to pull it out of your hat. This isn't communist Russia where a foreman is ordered to produce stuff but not given the wherewithal to make it happen. So here's your budget, here are your parameters, this is the limits of your authority. Every time God reaches into one of our lives to give us a direction, a task to accomplish. There is implied a promise of resources to accomplish that task. Those of us who've been on the periphery of missions have known this forever. When I worked with my youngsters at the aviation hangar, I teach them theology. I don't teach them how to fly. I figure they can get that from some others. But I always tell them, if God has really called you to the ministry, if God has called you to fly airplanes in wherever, He will provide the resources necessary to make that happen. Why? Because every call is a command with a promise. If God has called you to live a Christian life in this place, He will provide you all of the resources that you need to make that happen. Whatever that is. You need more spiritual depth. God will provide that if you'll accept it. You need more experience. God will provide that. So God says, I want you to get up and do this, and cross this Jordan and take that place. But I'm not leaving you on your own. You're not going to do this in your own strength. You should know that every place where you put the sole of your foot, I will give to you. Now the fundamental thing there is it's an old-fashioned infantry notion. Until you really put boots on the ground, you don't actually have the place. You might sign some paperwork that says you do, but until you've actually put boots there, you haven't won the war and you're not really done. In this modern world, there's some crazy stuff happening, and I don't know how wars work anymore, except that they're awful. Probably worse than they've ever been. But Joshua was facing a war, and it was a truly existential war. It was the kind of war where if Israel doesn't win this war, they will lose the opportunity to live on this land. That's just the way it goes. And when you and your men put boots on the ground in any place, I've given you that place. It's yours. The converse is also true. If you fail to put your boots on the ground, then you're just going to have to do without that place. And so there are a lot of places in Israel where Joshua's armies simply didn't go. And for the longest time, the Canaanites continued to live in those places until they finally went away, mostly of their own accord. Many of them continued to live next door to Israel for many, many years. When we get into the book of Judges, one of the first most important passages tells us that it came to pass that there rose up a generation who knew not the Lord, neither the things that He had done. This is the generation after Joshua. And so the judges cycle begins to happen, and the chaos of the 1300s and the 1200s BC ensues as foreign nations and indigenous bad guys come from a variety of directions to take control, to be beaten back, to take control some more, to be beaten back again, to burn, pillage, and destroy throughout all of Israel for roughly 300 years. Which, by the way, explains Albright's rather naive notion that there's all kinds of destruction, because there is, all over the place. But the Bible doesn't attribute that to Joshua. The Bible attributes that to the failure of the people of Israel to drive out the Canaanites and to establish a theocratic state in the place. When I say theocracy, by the way, everybody has the wrong idea. They picture the mullahs in Iran. Theocracy doesn't mean government by a bunch of self-proclaimed holy men. Theocracy is government by God himself. Israel was designed to, there's a famous phrase, when you're there, you will live in peace, and every man will live under his own fig tree and under his own vine. You'll have your own personal area, and that'll be yours, and the only governing authority will be God himself. That's how it's supposed to be. The reason it doesn't work very often is that most people cannot consistently live their lives under the control of a living God. I personally believe that God set this up deliberately as an object lesson. I want you to understand, folks, that you really can't do this. Oh, well, how about if we try human kings and judges and governors and stuff? Fine, try that. I'm all for it. But the same rules apply. Ultimately, there is one God in heaven and earth who will judge you for your sin and for your handling of this land that I'm giving you. Doesn't matter if you've got a king at the head of the thing. It's not on him, it's on you. And as individuals, the people of Israel were called to be personally responsible to God. And in that, they failed. And at that point, that's the rest of the Old Testament, is the story of the failure. And the hope that one day God himself will be present in the flesh to solve the problem. There's two problems, actually. There's the problem of sin. Some way or another, one, sin has to be forgiven, and secondly, sin has to be destroyed. And those are two elements, redemption and kingdom projects that God has been on throughout all of the biblical story. And Israel is an object lesson in that story. The reason I like Joshua, Judges, and just going through this is the connection to archaeology. Because you've got the very, very important biblical concept, these ideas of Israel as an object lesson for redemption and for kingdom principles. You know, very, top line, big idea type stuff that's tied intimately to the details on the ground. So as we look through, for example, Jericho, look at that, Jericho. Just where it's supposed to be. And look here. The walls are no longer standing. Well, which walls were those? Well, they were built during the Middle Bronze Age. Therefore, they weren't there during the Late Bronze Age when Joshua supposedly came. Excuse me, Dr. Kenyon, for just a moment, if you please. Think this through with me. We're going to look at some walls. I'm going to show you the walls of Jericho that are mostly collapsed, but you can see the bases of them, and you can see, if you read the pottery, that these were definitely built during the Middle Bronze Age when all of these cities were building great big walls. And Jericho had great big walls. 2 thumbs up. Okay. When we go to Jericho today, can we still see those walls? It's a tough question for Dr. Kenyon, because according to Kathleen Kenyon, the excavator of Jericho back in the 50s, there were no walls at Jericho in 1400 or 1200. She preferred 1200, but certainly not in 1400. They were gone. Hello? there were walls here, and then time goes by, and now there are walls here, and archaeologically, these walls were built here. Does that mean that the walls disappeared entirely during this 200-year period? Or is it just possible that these walls continue to exist until Joshua knocked them down? Kathleen Kenyon never answers that question. She can't. But that's what we're looking at. That's the kind of stuff we're looking at. Let's see, I'm going to get out of here. Command with a promise and some other stuff. Date of the conquest, I'm not going to go whole lot. 1406 just happens to be the horizon between Late Bronze 1 and Late Bronze 2. Okay, I'm sorry. Technical stuff. This is deep geek time. The various archaeological ages have been given rather arbitrary names. So we have the Bronze Age, which begins about 3000 BC and continues down through about 1200 BC, at which time the Iron Age begins. Now there was iron before 1200 BC, and bronze continued to be used after 1200 BC. 3000 BC is approximate because that's about the time that we start seeing the movement from mostly pottery finds to pottery and the occasional bronze find. Okay? And it's a broad thing. It's from Chalcolithic to Bronze Age. Okay. Bronze Age by itself is then divided up into early bronze, middle bronze, and late bronze. So early bronze, the end of the early Bronze Age is where Abraham arrives on the scene. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob were operating at the end of the early Bronze Age, a time of relative prosperity all over the Middle East, a time when cities grew fairly large. What cities there were rather ragtag cities. They weren't huge, but they were good sized with low walls all the way around. And we find these cities all over the Middle East. It was a time of prosperity and increasing population and apparently political stability. The end of early bronze, something happened right during the centuries around Abraham. We don't know entirely what it was. Could it have been a plague? Possibly. Some kind of war? Who was fighting who? We've never been able to figure out. Some kind of political instability? We don't know. That caused a huge relocation of very large numbers of people. And that led to the Middle Bronze Age. Middle Bronze Age, from roughly 2000 to roughly 1500 BC, is a time when cities got very small and they erected very large walls. And so we go to a place where we find it surrounded by walls that were built probably in the 16s or 17s or 1800s BC. We say, well, this is the Middle Bronze Age city. Late Bronze Age is characterized by Egyptian control over the world, the Mediterranean world, more or less. They controlled the trade routes. And so we find that the ancient walls were generally abandoned or left in place, which is really what you do with a wall. You know, you don't move in trucks to take it out of the way because it's no longer necessary. You just leave it there. And eventually tourists come and take pictures of it. That's the way you do it with walls. And those walls continued, but the cities expanded beyond. As at Lachish. One brief part of my stint there was in a thing called the Foss temples. This is an area that had been excavated back in the 30s. And we were reopening a part of that to recheck some of the stratigraphy, and my job was the pickaxe guy. I was to dig the hole so that the real archaeologists could look at the strata one more time. That was, I was not the slightest bit authoritative there. I just dug a hole. And what we found there was that that is in fact late Bronze Age. That was part of Lachish during that time. When we look at other cities in Israel, we find much the same thing. Jericho had a surrounding set of suburbs outside of the walls. We know that. For whatever it's worth. Okay, and the main thing is Egypt. Egypt caused the stability of this time. In Israel particularly, there is a break between Late Bronze I and Late Bronze II. Happens right at 1400 BC. Okay. Several archaeological markers, really important. And I know, this is Nerdsville, I know that. But the chocolate on white pottery. Chocolate is a kind of a deep brown color. The white is a very finely levigated, finely made clay pot, made from really, really, really fine limestone sand that is mostly found on the island of Cyprus. This is Cypriot chocolate on white ware. And it's very, very nice stuff. I would expect that it was expensive, it was imported. Importation of things like that, luxury goods like the chocolate on whiteware, was only possible in the area of Israel during the Late Bronze Age, and specifically Late Bronze I. So when we dig into Canaanite cities in that level, sometimes we'll come up with a small fragment of chocolate on white. And archaeologists have gotten so they recognize that stuff and say, chocolate on white, we must be at a Canaanite level. Late Bronze I, Canaanite level. After 1400 BC, something remarkable happens to the chocolate on white. It is no longer readily available or much harder to get for the Canaanite cities in Israel. It gets very hard to get. How can you tell? Well, because the people who wanted it began finding local potters who would make imitation chocolate on white. They'd make little chocolates and stuff, and it'd be white with a slip and chocolate color on the outside. It was very nice. But if you look at the pottery, if you take genuine chocolate on white and compare it with the imitation stuff, it's obvious. The imitation stuff is thicker. It's got big chunks of sand that are visible to the naked eye. When you run your hand over it, you can feel the sharp bumps. In other words, it's junk pottery. It's really awful stuff. I walked into a pottery shop, an antiquity shop in Jerusalem, owned by an old Arab fella. He's probably dead by now. I haven't seen him in, 40 years. He's dead by now, which is too bad. He's a nice guy. I called him Ahmed the Grave Robber. His name wasn't Ahmed, and I'm sure he never robbed a grave, but we had some fun with that. One of his grandkids would be watching each of his shops, and if I would walk into one of those shops, the grandkids would dart off and he'd come waddling back. It was great fun. I said, Ahmed, what have you got for me this time? And I'd look around his shop, and I remember the day I noticed a piece, very nice, a juglet, stood about that high. Nice shape, and I could tell from a distance, this is imitation chocolate on white. Because it's in the textbooks, it's just everywhere. And I saw that, and I didn't want to show any great interest, because then it gets interesting. Okay. But I couldn't help, and I wandered over and I picked that up, and I said, "Oh, man, this is really a very nice piece of chocolate on white. I'm sure I can't afford it today, but I just wanted to make the note that this is really nice." And I went to put it back up on the shelf, and he was very, very excited about this. He says, "My friend, Dr. John, you must take this. This is not imitation chocolate. This is the genuine chocolate on white. Absolutely genuine. This is the real." He just didn't understand. And he thought I was trying to get a lower price because it was imitation. And we bargained for a while. I ended up not getting it, but I always wished that I had. That's one of the signs that you've got a break there. There's another even more obvious thing with carbonated jars, but I'm not going to go into that. And it's with a sharp carination around the outside, and everybody had them. In 1700 BC, very sharp carinations, and then they figured out that breaks, and so they made them slightly less sharp during the years. In 1400 BC, the carbonated jars disappear. So you can tell that something major happened to society about 1400 BC, about the time that Israel invaded the land. You don't have them anymore. What happened to them? Well, we don't actually know what happened to the jars, and that really doesn't matter. What matters is that something major happened about that time. And at about that time, Jericho fell, Ai fell, and Hatzor fell. And we can demonstrate all of that from the archaeology. Okay, see, international, yeah. Okay, let me get out of this one. Boundaries I'm not going to do now. Call to courage. Yeah. So, end of chapter 1, Joshua calls the people. Be strong, be very courageous. God is giving you this land, so let's go in. And the next area, let's see what I've got here. Okay. Chapter 2 is a great fun story of Rahab and the spies. The spies were really attempting to do actual spying. They weren't an armed reconnaissance patrol like the 12 that Moses had sent in. Those guys were dressed up like Israelites, and they were commanded to stay out of the way, don't get caught. Okay, all of that is going on. These spies, 2 guys, were supposed to dress up like Canaanites, sneak into Jericho, and figure out what's going on. And so they did. They came into Jericho just before the gates were shut, and they went into the house of a prostitute named Rahab. Now, why would a couple of nice Jewish boys go to a prostitute's house for the night? I mean, that seems counterintuitive. And anybody who's ever been around policemen knows why they did that. If you want to know what's happening on the street, what people are talking about, and what's going on, it's good to talk to the drug dealers and the prostitutes and the gangbangers that you've got under your control on the street. They went to a prostitute's house because that's a good place to get information. Rahab figured out who these men were. The soldiers of the city came, and she decided that she was going to throw in her lot with this people of Israel. And her first act of faith was to lie to the soldiers. I've always found that striking. The first convert in the Holy Land is a Canaanite prostitute whose first act of faith was treason. Man, I'm not sure I can handle this. How does that fit into my doctrine of salvation? I mean, we're supposed to be good, are we not? And evidence for Rahab being good any time prior to this moment are scarce on the ground. So how does God do this? Well, it's actually good news. God understood that Rahab was living a bad life. God understood that Rahab was a Canaanite. God understood that this whole prostitution scheme, state sanctioned, culturally sanctioned, religiously sanctioned, was a very great evil that would cause enormous damage in the world. And he was ready to be gracious to Rahab. I've had people come to me and say, you know, I would be a Christian, but I can't be good enough. My sins are so bad, God could never forgive me for what I've done, and I could never be good enough to maintain that. And I always tell them, well, I've got good news for you. You don't have to be good. You don't have to be anywhere close to perfect. If God could make an exception to the rules to carve out a place for Rahab, he'll figure out how to handle you. And, but you don't know my sin. Oh, yes, I do. Yes, I do. These spies knew Rahab's sin. They said, if you will do this, then you'll be welcomed in. Rahab is a fascinating character because she, afterwards, after the fall of Jericho, walls come down and Rahab goes out with these characters, with Israel. She becomes a part of Israel and eventually marries a young man by the name of Salmon. Now, we're not told the name of the spies, but the romantic in me says that Salmon was one of those two spies. It would make a good melodrama on TV, I think, but we don't know. Married Salmon, who just happens to be of the tribe of Judah, who just happens to trace a lineage back to Judah and Tamar. Oh, that's rather an ugly story back in the book of Genesis. So Rahab and Salmon get married and they become a part of Israel. They're going along, they're doing that whole Israeli thing, and they're having kids who had some kids, who had some kids, who had some kids, one of whom was Boaz, father of David. Boaz married Ruth. Now, whatever you do, God tells Moses to tell the people, whatever you do, don't you ever even think about marrying a Moabite. Moabites are awful. They hate us. Never, in the day that you do a thing like that, all of that going on. And yet Ruth was welcomed into the nation of Israel. That's an exception that we call grace. Grace is always an exception to the wrath of God. God didn't break any laws doing this. He made an exception. He, being the chief executive of the universe, actually has that power. And Ruth became a child of God. And so we've got children and children and children. We've got David come along the line of them. We've got Bathsheba. And the line comes through Solomon, son of Bathsheba. Okay, God handle the forgiveness of sin that is hard to handle? Oh yes, I think so. And part of the fun of going to a place like Jericho, this by the way is Jericho, that wall in the background was uncovered by the Italians back around 2000, a special 2-year excavation there. That particular one is mud brick walls, dates to the Middle Bronze Age. Those were there in 2000 AD. And I know because I took the picture. They were there when Joshua arrived. They were also there about 1700 BC when they were first built. Kathleen Kenyon is misinformed. There are the walls. Now, you say, well, why are there any walls at all left? Because when walls fall down, they don't fall down evenly. It's kind of a mess. Next week, I'll show you some of the mess that the walls made when they came down. Let's break. Yeah, we'll let you go to church. God bless.